I'm Stuart White, the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Futures, and it's my pleasure to facilitate this panel question session. We'll be keeping that fairly short, just so that we make sure we keep to time for the next phase. But what I did want to do before we open up to the questions that I'm sure you've so diligently prepared, to a few of those questions, I wanted to just ask each of the panellists just a bit of a recap, but also a little bit of a vision for the future. Baz talked about that to change we need to know, we need to want, and we need to be able. Well, the other thing we need to be able to do is dream and imagine and have a vision. So I just wondered if the speakers could respond to that, particularly, and starting with Alex, what's your vision? And Attila certainly talked about innovation, and CSIRO is an engine of innovation. And what do you see as being the key enablers to delivering transformational innovation in Australia in these matters?
Thanks very much, Stuart. Is that on?
It's on.
Okay. Vision for Australia. Putting my National Research Agency hat on, I think we have a real opportunity to actually be off the forefront of a real revolution that we see happening across the world and across this region. I think, as we have heard this morning, the change of the economy will be absolutely profound, moving from a one-way use to a really, hopefully, a circular use economy. Now, that could be a massive threat for a country like Australia, because Australia last year earned $170 billion from the export of those resources that you have seen, for instance, used in Janet's fantastic film. Australia is the world's largest exporter of iron ore, soon to be the largest exporter of LNG, second largest exporter of coal, third largest exporter of uranium ore. The challenge obviously for a country like Australia in this new economic paradigm is, well, what's going to happen to these exports? My view is that doesn't need to be a threat to a country like Australia, because we do have the relationships with a lot of customer countries. We have a lot of the global corporations that actually serve those customers. We certainly have the ingenuity. So what we need to do is we need to come up with the innovations that will ultimately power the economy of the future and play our role of implementing those solutions in this region. And I think if we do that, we can build an industry that's at least as big as the current resources export industry in Australia. And if we can play a small part in that, I think that would be a fabulous outcome.
Thanks, Alex. So, Professor Yoshimura, at the end of your talk, you spoke about a vision for using waste materials, in this case carbon, to produce new products which themselves could have environmental and resource advantages. So what's your vision? What role do you see advanced technology playing?
So Japan, it has no such kind of resources. Then the very, very famous project undergoing in Japan is that how to make very, very efficient materials. For example, the catalyst materials instead of very precious materials like platinum, something like that. And for this purpose, so the government supplies many monies to our community, and so we're trying to make a very cheap material, using very cheap materials like silicon and nickel, something like that, to make so if we combine these materials like alloys, so metal, this metal, so mix this is alloys, then to make very similar materials like platinums. So we're trying to make so chemical chemist and physicist and theorist. So we together to make such kind of very nice materials, because we don't have any resources. And also for example, gold. Gold is also very precious materials, and we don't have any gold. Maybe Africa, South Africa, they have many golds. But maybe you don't know that we have many gold in Japan, many golds. It's comparative to the African, South Africa. Where is that? It's in the cell phone or some computer. Inside such kind of device, we already used many golds. Then we are recycling it. Then now we are very happy and stabilized in terms of the gold. We don't have any gold. We don't have to import any gold from the overseas. Now we have a gold recycling systems. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So, Janet, what's your vision? And looking particularly from the Asia-Pacific point of view, how do you see the importance of resource issues featuring within policy and society in the following decades?
Yeah, I think that it's just going to get, and you mentioned going, gone, and then what Alex mentioned, going, gone. I think it's more and more is the theme for resources in Asia-Pacific. The International Resource Panel is looking at quantifying the outlook for resource use, and they'll come out with some good findings in a few years, but the initial findings suggest that resource use, those piles of resources, will only grow and grow and grow. And along the way, they're going to butt into some serious social issues. You know, the ore deposits that are out there, or the new agricultural land that might be needed, it's going to overlap with sensitive areas, either in terms of environmentally or socially sensitive areas. So I think that it will increasingly become a political discussion, and civil society will have to be playing a role and having a say on how the natural resources in their countries are used on their names. I think one big opportunity, though, is that a lot of the resources will be used to build cities. Like we saw the city growing in just, was it 15 years? The city popping up, yeah. So all the new cities that are popping up in across the Asia-Pacific region will be a big opportunity to learn from the less efficient practices that were used in the 19th, 18th century, 20th century, and to leapfrog and use the best available technology. And I do see urban development as being one of the big opportunities, and related to that, R&D, which we've seen from Japan, that's a big opportunity, and that's where I would put my money today.
Great, thanks very much. So now over to tables for the questions that you were talking about earlier. I hope you were talking about them. Is there any tables that would like to start? Over here.
Question perhaps to Mr. Yoshimura. You spoke about
Okay.
carbon materials.
Yes.
Traditional material-centric point of view, you listed the material properties, what they are. If we speak about a circular economy, would you think it's also necessary in future to list the recyclability index of that material, number one, but not as a material, but in a complex product like the batteries you've indicated, from which the recycling rate, I would think, is very close to zero. And number two, Janet spoke about footprints, that one would also indicate the footprint of that carbon nanotube per kilogram, so that you can truly compare it across the other materials. So from a circular economy point of view, I think material development should start incorporating those properties into their lists.
Okay, we'll just hold the answer to that question. We'll just get a couple more questions banked up so that we can have comments from the panel. Our second question. This table.
So my question is that can improving resource efficiency really keep up with and exceed the population-driven demand, so that we end up limiting and maybe even reducing total impact?
Right. challenging question. And over here, Ruth, we have a microphone.
How do we connect with the issue of very unequal distribution of resources currently when we're discussing the urgency of improving efficiency?
Great. Okay, well, if I can ask the questioners to respond in any order to any of those questions. Professor Yoshimura, I think the first one may have been directed to you.
Yeah, that's a very tough questions. And so yeah, we have, for example, have a very sophisticated, electronic board for example, computer, something like that. In that case, when we design such kind of materials, for example, including a lithium battery, so we should consider how to make it very simple, but how to part, is also the now the main topics for the designers of such kind of designers. So we just start thinking about that, and already I know that some computer systems that is very easily decoupled for the recycling. So such kind of lithium ions and something like that is so we need to consider more for the how recycling is easy or something like that. Thank you very much.
Alex, did you know?
Yeah, I might pick up on the question, can resource efficiency keep up, which I think is an excellent question. I won't answer the full question, but I'll give you a partial answer from an area that I'm quite familiar with, which is the energy space, and maybe an even more partial answer. Can we actually meet global energy demand and at the same time reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly? And I think, as you would know, there has been a lot of work done globally in this region and also in Australia that actually demonstrate, yes, it can be done. There's a lot of technologies out there that can achieve that in this particular subset. So I think the answer to your question is not necessarily a question around technology, although technologies can improve, but it's also a question around, are we going to implement the mechanisms in time that actually allow for the deployment of those solutions? Because I think it's more a societal than a technological question.
Janet?
Okay. I thought the question on equality is quite important. When we look at the resource use per capita, whether it's materials, energy or water, I don't think anyone in this room really relates to consuming 44 tonnes of materials per year. That's just a ridiculous amount of resources. But someone is. On a per capita basis, that's how much is being used. So I think that there should be more transparency in where these resources are being gotten out of the ground, where they're going, and more importantly, where are the revenues going? These governance issues are really coming up a lot in countries across Asia Pacific. Who deserves to get the revenues from resource use? Which groups are more vulnerable to the impacts of resource use? And I think the key there is transparency and bringing numbers into the picture and bringing the right people into the picture. But I do want to say that when we talk about resource efficiency, we have a bit of a public relations problem, I'd say. It sounds like you should just use less. And that's not what we want to say, because you can get a lot of social and economic benefits out of resources, and that's why we use them. But it's really about maximising the value you get, meaningful value that relates to people, to socioeconomic development, and a lot of that does involve transparency and equal distribution. So I think it's a critical point. And I just want to add on the topic of the question of can resource efficiency keep up with population and affluence. I think the CSIRO has a lot to say. I mean, Heinz has a lot to say on that, and there's a lot of data that could support a kind of a discussion on that in different contexts. So that could be a whole new session. Yeah.
Yep.